In 1942, the German army would begin taking delivery of a new anti-tank gun, which is now strangely almost unheard of. The gun in question? The Pak-41. To keep things somewhat brief, the Pak-41 is a 75mm/55mm, yes, I did say both 75mm and 55mm, anti-tank gun, which began development back in 1939 but wouldn't really pick up steam until 1941, and made use of a taper bore barrel and custom ammunition in order to deliver as much armor penetration as possible. The Pak-41 worked on the same principle as the 28mm Schwere Panzerbuchse, which is taking a larger caliber shell, in this case 75mm at the breech, and squeezing the shell down to a 55mm exit at the end of the barrel. The ammunition used by this gun is pretty easily identifiable thanks to its distinct aluminum alloy flanges which compress going down the barrel to maximize pressure. On the subject of ammunition, the gun came with 3 types of shells: a solid tungsten core shell, which was the standard armor-piercing shell, a steel cored shell, which was used only for training purposes, and an incredibly mediocre sub-caliber high-explosive shell. The armor penetration of this gun was frankly truly impressive, with the ability to penetrate a 145mm 30-degree sloped armored plate at 1 kilometer away. Now so far things don't sound bad, in fact the gun sounds quite good. Well, if you know anything about Germany's wartime situation, you already saw some red flags when I mentioned the word tungsten. Tungsten was something that was almost always in incredibly short supply, as Germany relied heavily on importing it, and there was seldom enough coming in at any given time, leading to inevitable ammunition shortages. Additional problems existed with this particular gun as well, such as the barrel life of the gun, which could only be described as suboptimal, with some gun barrels wearing out after only firing 600 shots. All of these issues were only further compounded by the fact that the gun cost even more to produce than the Pak-40. This, on top of numerous other factors, led to around only 150 of these guns ever being produced. Most of these guns would never even see service thanks to the aforementioned ammunition shortages, although a dozen of these would see great success in the now infamous Regev meat grinder. Despite this, by 1943, most of these guns were sent back to Germany to either be scrapped or given modified Pak-40 barrels, permanently turning them into training pieces. Now so far this all sounds like the standard wartime German shenanigans. But what if I told you that Germany was not the only one interested in these hyper-expensive superguns? In late 1942, Japan would purchase a license from the Germans to produce their own domestic version of the Pak-41, which would go on to become the primary focus of this video, the Type Gay. Now, despite what I mentioned earlier about the Japanese purchasing the license in 1942, the plans for the Pak-41 would not reach Japan until 1943. Looking at the surviving plan, much of the overall design of the gun seems to be just about the same, especially the carriage, which even uses the exact same wheels as the standard German Pak-41. However, it's worth pointing out that the Japanese have actually made alterations to the design, such as the reshaped muzzle brake, which now presents 20 exhaust cuts, as opposed to the Pak-41 16. The muzzle brake also appears to be mounted differently on the barrel, almost looking as if it somehow screws into the barrel, but please do not quote me on that. Now, what's really incredible is that apparently some of the statistics from the test firing of this gun have actually survived. Now please keep in mind that sadly, like a lot of other obscure wartime Japanese stuff, the information could potentially be incorrect and someone could just be pulling stuff out of thin air. But assuming these are the real stats, the Type Gay appears to have actually improved on the original design in one field, but also somehow made it worse. For instance, the Type Gay actually has seen an improvement in muzzle velocity over the Pak-41, delivering an output of 1,260 meters per second, as opposed to the latter's 1,125 meters per second. But somehow, at the same time, something seems to have gone wrong, as armor penetration has actually fallen off on the Type Gay. Case in point being the fact that the gun has managed to lose 5 millimeters of armor penetration at a kilometer's distance. Now, you could explain this away by a testing anomaly. However, the close-range performance is a little more alarming, with the Type Gay's 210mm of armor penetration at near point-blank range being 16mm less than the Pak-41. Now granted, we don't exactly know what the testing procedures were, we don't know what kind of armor plate they were firing at, the composition of that plate, or the angle of that plate, so this all very well could just be a moot point. Now, one of the most interesting changes made with the Type Gay was the fact that it had received a role expansion over the Pak-41. No longer being relegated to a simple towed anti-tank gun, it was now planned as the primary armament of an armored fighting vehicle. The two vehicles that were supposed to carry this new gun were the Type 4 Cheeto and the Type 5 NATO. The NATO would apparently be tested with this new gun and was deemed a success. The Cheeto was also allegedly tested with this gun, but unfortunately little information survives today, so it cannot be said for certain if it actually was ever fitted. The worst part of all is that we have no photos of either the prototype gun on a wheeled carriage or of the gun being fitted to either the NATO or the Cheeto. If you happen to be building a time machine in your basement, I implore you, please go back to this time period and please take some pictures for me. Now, despite the testing overall going quite well, the project ultimately fell through the moment some basic thought was applied to it. Germany already had, how you say, tungsten procurement issues. Well, for Japan, it was even worse. Much like Germany, Japan also relied heavily on imported materials to the point that they were practically forced to invade Southeast Asia in an attempt to get what they needed, as unlike Germany, they had no friendly neighbors like Portugal or Spain to supply them with even insufficient amounts of tungsten. This problem had only gotten worse by the mid-war, as most of these resources were no longer making it to Japan due to resistance within the occupied territories, as well as Allied air and naval strikes. The lack of any sufficient, dependable tungsten stockpiles meant that the Type Gay was completely infeasible, and would be the primary reason for the project's cancellation. The other issue was tooling the factories to be able to produce these highly complex guns, as well as the shells, which, considering the state of Japan's war industry even by this point, there was little to no hope of getting it into production. Now, as previously stated, we sadly do not have any photos of the prototype gun either on a wheeled carriage or in a vehicle, and we don't have photos of the shells, or schematics of the shells, or schematics of the installation in the vehicles. The sad reality is that the only evidence we have to show that this gun existed is this schematic right here, and that's it. Unfortunately, like many military projects carried out in Japan during the late stages of the war, most of the stuff regarding it has become lost media. Anyway, that'll about do it for this video. I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm not really sure how to go about this in a particularly smooth way, so I'll just brute force my way through the door here. I'm potentially considering opening my own tank museum. Granted, of course, not a real one, a virtual one. This museum's primary focus would be on vehicles that either never physically existed or ones that used to but now don't. Now, alas, the only place that I could find to actually be able to do this was VRChat. Now, I cannot actually guarantee that this will happen or not, because I'm the only one who's going to be working on this map currently, as unlike myself, much of you have actually touched grass. If it happens, and I'll be sure to link you to that world if it ever becomes public. Anyway, I'm gonna go illegally distill vodka on the engine deck of Object 279 now, so bye, I guess?